Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, a show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Tim Urban, author of the blog Wait But Why and the book What's Our Problem? This is definitely an unusual episode for TG Explains the Internet, as we are talking mostly about what happens on the internet, on the consumer internet, rather than, as we usually do, some aspect of the underlying technology and the business of the internet. Tim is an astute observer of human trends, one that I've been reading for years, as you will hear, and I really had a great time trying to relate his insights to what I know about the structure of global telecoms. We get into how the internet has complicated human communication and played a role in our tendency to fall into tribalism. What's our problem? His book has some really fascinating analogies for what's going on in the world. I'll save those for the show. But suffice to say, he talks about the breadth of human history and how ill-equipped our brains are in some ways to handle the environment that we find ourselves in the 21st century. We also talk about Tim's forthcoming book, which attempts to tell the story of everything from the Big Bang to the end of the universe. Don't worry if that sounds like a big topic. We really focus on the section that's about AI. We discuss how it is very early days for AI, and it's hard to know where it's going to go from here. And we also tie in how the internet is the physical backbone for this new sort of synthetic brain that we're building and what that might mean. Tim has interviewed many experts on this topic for his new book, and from what it sounds like, there's little agreement on how AI is going to play out, which is sort of nice for me to hear because it's very confusing where we're sitting today. As always, if you like what you hear, please rate the show, subscribe, and tell a friend to listen, and find me on LinkedIn for questions or feedback. Finally, for full disclosure, I asked Gemini to write an intro to this show based on the transcript and using some examples of other intros. It certainly saved me a little bit of time in terms of organizing my thoughts, but I really rewrote almost everything that it offered. So just an interesting data point for you. Okay, enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Definitely a different kind of thing for me, so I'm excited about that. So, Tim, let's start out with some background on you and Wait But Why. Maybe some of the how you got to where you are and the major themes that you write about.
Yeah. So it was 2013. I was actually since 2005 I started just blogging as a procrastination activity. Didn't put much time
I
into
remember
it.
those days. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I was doing it. I was kind of, it was my favorite thing to do of the things I was doing. And it was not, so I decided 2013, along with my business partner, Andrew Finn, we were running an ed tech company, and decided, if, what would happen if instead of spending 5 hours a week on blogging, I did 60 hours a week. And
Yeah.
so we started Wait But Why. And I've been blogging ever since. I started writing about really whatever was interesting to me. I kind of just use myself as a litmus test. If I found something funny, I figured other people might too. If I found something, if I was curious about something or wanted to learn more, or wish someone would explain this to me, then I would learn about it and explain it, because I figured there's a lot of people like me so I would just kind of use myself as a litmus test. And
it worked, because I've been reading it pretty much since then. So there you go.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. It's actually a great way to meet people you like, because the people who, an article, makes, you never know which articles are going to go viral. It's kind of a crapshoot, but once in a while one does. And a lot of people come to the site, and some people think, I don't like this at all. And some people think, oh, I like that. That's cool. And they leave and never come back. And then some people are like, oh, wow, this is my kind of place. And then they go and read all your other posts. And those people are just going to naturally be someone that you would probably be friends with, or that you would have a lot in common with. So it's great. It's a great, way to kind of meet new people as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, this ties in, I think, to a couple of the things that I want to talk about today. But do you think that in 2025, someone could start a long form blog with deeply researched topics and sort of get known out there in the world. It seems to me that the structure of the internet in that sense has fundamentally changed.
Well, it's funny because when I started in Wait But Why in 2013, people said blogging is dead was like one of the main.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And Andrew and I always kind of had um, a philosophy where it's like the big trends that happen, they don't necessarily apply if you're doing something really well. If you're doing something really well, like if it can stand out, like it can do, it can always make, um, make headway in the world. And so we thought kind of, okay, so, maybe the golden age of blogging has passed and it's not kind of like the hippest medium anymore. Podcasts were starting to get big.
I was going to say, we're sitting here doing a podcast. It's not like that ship
has and podcasts have just gotten bigger and bigger, of course. Yeah. Now everyone in the world has a podcast. The thought was there was a ton, and there was, BuzzFeed had just started and all of these sites kind of churning out mediocre content. Someone would work. Someone would work 2 hours on, an hour on, and they weren't all bad, but they weren't, they weren't a very high quality piece of work, right? And there was a flooded with that, and thought, okay, well, what if I can't out BuzzFeed, but I can out quality them, right? Like I can spend, instead of doing 200 articles a week like they do, I can try to do one a week and make it really good, or at least either really well researched or really well thought out, or just I would do illustrations for each one, and I think there's still a hunger for people who do like reading, and they are going to notice if something is really good. And I would say the same thing goes for podcasts right now. There's a billion podcasts, but that doesn't mean that if someone comes out and does something really excellent, there's not a lot of excellent podcasts. So that was kind of that's why in general right now, so to answer your question, I think right now, there's still Substack, there's still a whole economy for this stuff, and maybe it's not, maybe fewer people are reading long form things, but there's a lot of people out there. The internet's big, so if like one in 1,000 people really likes that's still 7 million people out there looking for good, long form content, and it's more than 1 in 1,000. So I think I think someone could still start today and totally make a name for themselves on Substack or wherever.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I think it's precisely in line with the kind of things that we're going to talk about in terms of how the internet's ubiquity is a feature and a bug, right? So I think a lot of that you started to touch on. Where I wanted to start is in your most recent book, or I guess your first book, right? What's Our Problem? Just tell us the background of that, and sort of the core concepts that you were working on, trying to get away from blogging for a while and do something more sort of formal, book length.
I didn't initially plan on getting away from blogging. It was supposed to be a blog post that then I was like, oh, there's so much to say here. Basically, the topic was, I was looking around at the society I lived in, and it felt like, obviously humans always have like kind of multiple sides to them, and human societies can be really, they can be very thoughtful and compassionate, and they can make rational decisions, and can build incredible technology, and can do, discover amazing things, and work together and cooperate, and can just be great societies. And then societies also sometimes just can become like just totally slip into kind of like primitive tribal mode, and it's just kind of like a program in the human brain that probably helped us survive 30,000 years ago in a totally different world. And now it's just it doesn't really make sense. What makes sense in a democracy would be vigorously debating the right policies and arguing about them, trying to win people over to that makes sense. You're going to have conflict.
It's the promise of the Enlightenment, right?
And it's worked in many ways really well. I mean, look at all the
no doubt.
Social movements and the economic movements that have changed because someone had an idea and they won people over and they won votes. I mean, it's a great system most of the time, but this I think this primal instinct can kick in, and it can kick in kind of waves, and it can kind of spread like an epidemic. And I think we had fallen into one of these where it was just like this, people identifying really, really hard with their tribe and hating and dehumanizing the other tribe, and institutions kind of, the really important institutions that we have, everything from, media to academia to, the FBI to whatever, so many these pillars of this house we're living in, this kind of, we're just all starting to kind of get kind of hijacked by the tribal wave that had tsunami that had washed over the country. So it was my attempt to kind of, first it was a blog post, then it was going to be a series, and then I was like, this is just a book. This is just too long. There's too much to say. Because I wanted to get into the history and the psychology and why do we do this, and to try to, I don't know, I know what I know from talking to people is that most people aren't that crazy or that tribal, and that, I wanted to kind of try to help frame this topic in those people's heads in a way that could make them feel more sure about themselves to come speak out against kind of this wave of kind of tribalism.
But also, it's definitely inside all of us, right? So I can say want to lose weight, and I have an app, and I have lots of knowledge about nutrition. But in the end, I have this primitive brain that says fat and sugar is hard to get, and therefore, when it's near, I should get it, right? You know what I mean? So you can acquire all of the knowledge and tools in the world, but it's still struggle to get out of our evolutionary history. One of the things that I thought was most fascinating in the book is right out of the gate when you describe the length of human history as a book. Could you take us through that analogy?
Yeah. So it's crazy how long human history is if you actually zoom out on the whole thing. The first kind of Homo sapiens, we have evidence going back to at this point it's 320,000 years ago.
Right.
And those really early people, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a hard line to define.
Yeah, I don't know how they would fare in today's society. They might be a little odd, but basically, I mean, really not that different. DNA almost exactly like ours. They look pretty much like humans, and they would be again maybe intelligence has gone up a little, but they'd be pretty smart. Like they're people. There's people 300,000 years ago. So I kind of thought again, because the line's hazy, I said let's just say 250,000 years, which is kind of safer. These are really people now.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, so if that were if someone wrote a 1,000-page book describing the whole story of human history. And they dedicated, the same amount of years to each page. So 250 years is covered in each page. That would be 250,000 years total. And so I just kind of laid out the pages, and I was like, damn, in this 1,000-page book, all there is hunter gatherers till page 950. That's that's 95% of the book is just hunter gatherers. That's really the story of humans.
A few stone tools that were innovations.
So stone tools actually started. Yeah. Stone tools started. The earliest stone tools we believe were actually pre-human, like Australopithecus. That stone tools are go back to all the Homo erectus and Homo habilis and all that. So that and that really was maybe one of the things that started to lead to this brain growth that led to
make us human.
It's kind of an unusual thing.
Cooking food, for example. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So that was another one. Cooking food was a huge deal because fire was a big deal for lots of reasons, but really, if you look at like the chimpanzee diet or whatever, their teeth are much bigger, so their jaws have to be bigger, which changes the shape of their skull, and they have to have this really robust digestive system that they spend a lot of their day chewing, and their digestive system uses a bunch of energy. If you cook the food, you're basically outsourcing a huge part of that process to the fire. So the fire does a lot of the tenderizing of the food and the breaking it down. And then when you eat it, you spend like 1/5 of the time that a chimpanzee spends on eating and energy. That energy can then go to the bigger brain and things like that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Same thing. The stone tools. It expands your diet. You can crack through bone and to get marrow and things like that. That you just have this new source of nutrition. You can come by energy more easily. You can those things go way back. And there were a lot of other humans that were kind of like us. Really not that different. They were other humans, like not chimps. Those are our cousins. They were sibling species, like all over, and they all are gone. We are the one member of the family that's left. Maybe because we had something to do with that, or maybe because they just went extinct. Or probably we had something to do with them all disappearing.
Even if not, intentional, as it were, it's just out competing, that kind of thing, right? So,
totally. I mean, and like you can look at human history in two ways. One is it's so long, and that's what we'll talk about in a second with this book.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also so short in the scheme of things because if that 1,000-page book were on a shelf, there have been humans. You can go back and 8 books. You can really eight of those books on this shelf are all kind of Homo something, and only the last book do we show up. So that's a long time now. Our common ancestor with chimps goes back like a whole bookshelf. It would be something like 25 books. So like a big bookshelf. That's how long it's been since the common ancestor of chimps. We had that ancestor was again the common ancestor of both all chimps and bonobos and us. And that's like so much time passed to get to here. And that's why, us and chimps, we have a lot in common. Our DNA is very similar, but we're quite different as well. And even that is like just 1/10 of the time since like the dinosaur asteroid and mammals started taking over the world. And even that's like, you can just keep going and it's just like multiply by 10. And now you have early animals. Like the time spans, it's like the bigness of space. It's like when you actually try to wrap your head around it, you just can't.
You just lose it. Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
so much time has gone by. So that brings us to now, this one little last book on this, really a giant library that goes all the way back to the early animals. This one little last book. Now, on that book, again, 95% of the book, so almost the entire book, is hunter-gatherers. That's us. That's what we do. We're in small bands of hunter-gatherers who and about so and then it was in that book, it was maybe page 800 that we started to have language, and we started to have advanced language, abstract thinking. So really, the first, again, I'm saying 250,000 years. The first 200,000 of 250,000, the first 80%, we weren't quite us yet in cognitively, in that we didn't have there's not evidence that we were doing much abstract thinking and abstract language. Abstract meaning, a concrete, I can say there's a tiger, run, or whatever, or like, let's go over to that tree. Abstract would be, remember that tree yesterday that was by the river we went to? We should, go cut wood down there so that when it's winter in 3 months, we can, this kind of abstract stuff that's not concretely in front of you. Right. That's human superpower. I mean, other animals do it on a few of them on a very small extent, but like humans, this is our superpower more than anything else. And then we developed abstract language to be able to not just have those thoughts, but to collaborate on them, to talk about them. If you give a chimp like a sharp rock and a dull rock, it will figure out that the sharp rock is more useful and start using it. But it won't understand why. It won't understand the concept of sharpness. That's an abstract concept. It won't be able to sharpen the next rock. It won't, it'll just be like, it'll think it got lucky with this rock. It can not just understand sharpness, they can discuss it. They can discuss techniques for doing it. They can collaborate, right? So that's why we've taken over the world.
Yeah, you hide over there, and I'll flush the deer this way, right? That's the major innovation.
You can't compete with a species that can do that when no one else can. Then this teamwork. Now we can form this super brain. So anyway, you basically, the things that we think of as crazy ancient, like Homer. Homer was on page like 990 of the 1,000-page book. 990, like the very end of the book. The AD. is the last 8 pages of the 1,000-page book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a reminder of how recently civilization has developed and how we are not in our element here. We've been kidnapped out of our habitat, which is the hunter-gatherer savanna or woodlands, and we've been plopped into a totally artificial environment that we've built for ourselves. But it's trying to get along and do politics together is not is as a challenge. And then the punchline of the whole book thing is that even as recently as page 799, the end of page 999, the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking like, I use George Washington as an example, who lived right around the border of page 999 and 1,000. His life was not that different than his world was not that different than like the ancient Mesopotamians. It was different. They had bigger buildings, they had bigger ships, they had better farming techniques, they knew more about the universe. But like it's a much, much bigger difference from him coming one page forward to today than someone from ancient Mesopotamia coming like, I don't know, 20 pages or whatever it would be, like 20 pages forward to coming to where he lived. Like everything about our society is just a page 1,000 phenomenon. Electricity.
I don't know if you've heard this one, with sort of Cleopatra is closer to the iPhone than the building of the pyramids, right? So,
yeah. And again, Cleopatra and George Washington and the people who built the pyramids lived in a world that was, the power was always off in all three of their lives.
Right.
There was no electricity. There was no, there just were no factories. There was no steam engines. They were using the same kind of, George Washington, his world was using the same kind of energy, water, wind, fire, as the most ancient people. Right. They didn't have plumbing, right, in any of those three worlds. You can just say they have a lot in common. You go, thing by thing, and population was under 1 billion in all of those three worlds. We have 8 now, 1 page. So this last 250 years was just complete anomaly.
Yeah. And really the last 25, right? So that's, it's telegeography explains the internet here. The internet would show up in the last few words of page 1,000, right? So that's and
totally the last like 2 lines, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly, I think, why your book resonated so much with me, is that I'm thinking all the time about the internet, how it developed, where it is, how it's reached people in the physical sense, right? And you put it in this context of creatures of evolution who are incredibly ill-equipped to deal with this level of communication, right? Even within the sort of internet world itself, the folks who invented the internet, right, for, it was nerds like academics, people working for the government, that kind of thing, envisioning really like that it would never be something that went much beyond the nerds, right? Certainly not something like we have now, where
the ARPANET.
Yeah, exactly, right. You know what I mean? And then from there, even when it spread to individuals outside of those institutions, they were people who were, very educated for the most part, who were thinking about these things on a very different level. I forget where I heard this, but before the last 20, 15 even years or so, most adult humans would write their last sort of paragraph in high school, right, for the rest of their lives, right? Maybe they would write the occasional letter, but now we have this world where like literally anyone, almost, right, certainly within the developed world, can communicate with potentially millions of people, right? So in What's Our Problem, this is the framework that I'm reading it with. I want you to give us your ladder analogy, because that's the other, I think, real sticking point of the book in terms of what folks need to put a pin in there.
Everyone's like left, right, center, far right, far left, center, right, center. I mean, it's one dimension, right? That's a horizontal line.
Yeah,
and it's useful, right? It helps inform, talk about certain policies where they are.
There's some real differences along that line.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's really interesting to talk about it, and I think and I think we need people across that to have a healthy society. I think that each part of that has its role in helping the society function and be healthy and evolve in the right way and the right speed. But I kept hearing people try to refer to, the problem is there's the far right or the far left, and we need more people to speak out in the center. We need more people. And I'm thinking that's not what they're trying to say. They're not talking about
Right.
like a centrist policy position
Mm-hmm.
in between, like that's like some middle ground between. That's not what they're talking about. And when they refer to far left and the far right, they're not really talking about like someone who just happens to have some fairly radical policy prescriptions that they think would be helpful. They're talking about something else, and I think that it was like we need a vertical access to go along. It just opens up this space into something that makes much more sense to talk about. And
Right.
to me, I kind of thought, I think what they're talking about is this vertical access to me was like when people say, oh, the center. I think what they're trying to say is less, hardcore ideologues, like people who are more open to compromise, people who are open to debate, who open to changing their mind, people who are who care about the truth and really are trying to get it right. There's some humility,
Right.
and they respect the people who disagree with them, and they understand that sometimes they're not going to win in a democracy, and that's okay. That's part of a democracy, and they need to get better at changing minds, and this very healthy kind of grown-up way of doing politics. And it doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're not just as passionate. It just means that you're doing it in a way that I think is what you're supposed to, how a democracy is actually supposed to function.
Yeah, if you take seriously kind of like a loose term maybe, but like Enlightenment values, you could still find yourself in a variety of places on the left right spectrum.
Well, that's the point. Is I think actually it's not
Yeah.
just that it's giving the center too much credit to just call that the center. It's also
Hmm.
actually not doing justice to the rest of the spectrum. Because, as I said, I have friends that I could qualify as both quite far left, like they're fairly into Marxism, and then quite far right. They're really conservative. That I would consider very what I would call high rung, in
Hmm.
that they really back up their ideas with a lot of data and evidence.
Right.
They change their mind. They don't, they're not just following a checklist of here's what people like me believe. They're open to, debate. They're fun to debate with because
Hmm.
they ideas are things to play with up on the
Right.
high rungs. On the high rungs, an idea is like it's like a little machine you've built. This is my idea. And when someone disagrees with it, it's like someone trying to see if they can break it. And if they can't, okay, look, this isn't a good, strong idea. If they can, by pointing out a flaw that is, a good point, um, your idea wasn't that good. You
Hmm.
should
Hmm.
thank them, and they
Right.
and in general, you seek out dissent. You try to understand where might I be wrong, right? So that's this high rung mindset. Now, when I think people are trying, when they say the far right and the far left of the problem, what they're really saying is, again, the kind of the hardcore ideologues, the people who identify with their idea. So the
Hmm.
idea is not something to be played with and to be improved upon and something you're working on. It is part of you. It is me. It is
Right.
us. It is who we are. This is the people like us believe these things.
Hmm.
And when you're in that mode, nothing's going to change your mind, and you're not going to want to hear dissent. You're going to hate the people who disagree with you. Those are the bad kind of people. The people who believe that are those people, and we're us, and we're the good people, and they're the, and it's not, I know we all can get there. I know the feeling. It doesn't feel good
Yeah.
to feel this way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or sometimes it feels good because actually it does feel good because you're in like really kind of primitive mode and you're bonding with your tribe about how awful those other
That's
people
right.
are.
Exactly. It's like, that like we can have thought about this a lot, and you're still going to at some point get into your amygdala, right?
Of
And feel that way, but certainly I think what I really liked about your book is that I could go through in my own life, and you give sort of profiles of each of these rungs of the ladder, and think of individuals that I know that are the scientist or the sports fan or whatever. So, yeah.
Totally. And like the top rungs go across the whole spectrum, so do the bottom rungs. So of course you do
Mhm.
have lots of far right, far left people at the bottom rung, because those, people who are in a tribal zone are going to gravitate towards kind of, a pretty intense tribe a lot of the time. But I would say there's also low rung centrists, people who centrism
Yep.
is their
Right.
ideology, and they'll always have to say that both sides are, equal, and both sides are this and that. and they will always, identify with whichever candidate seems more moderate without thinking that hard about whether they're actually good at their job or whatever. So, again, I don't think I think you might see more of a grouping out here on the low rungs, but you're going to see this box that is created by these two axes. There's people everywhere in this box.
Yeah, I mean, that is precisely why I enjoyed this book so much. And again, bringing to it my world that I think about all the time, right? the internet, and not just like physically where it's located, but how it has spread throughout the world. That's like one of the things we cover is how the efficacy of the internet has changed for people as the people who are behind the internet have spread it from just being something that's in major economic centers in the West and then spreading to the whole world, but also out on the macro scale, on the sort of individual scale. That like I said, people who weren't sort of equipped to be able to mass communicate, to be able to read things from all over the world. You used to get information about health primarily from your doctor, right? And now you're getting information about your health from someone crazy who just happens to also, be on the internet. And so I'm reading your book with that kind of thing in mind of thinking of just how weird this world is, where someone who previously would have been holding maybe a cardboard sign in the park is now, has a million followers on TikTok or whatever. However, in the book, you gave me a little hope here, where you kind of suggest, I think it's a very small part of the book, but sort of suggest at the end that maybe this anarchic vision of the internet can be part of the solution. Could you flesh that out a little more? Have you thought about that since writing the book a little bit?
Well, yeah, the internet isn't as a double-edged sword as it is in so many ways, right?
Yeah.
There's so much good that has come from the internet.
Absolutely.
And you can just go on forever about the good that's come from the opportunity it's caused, the amazing, incredible things that
if you're an autodidact, it's like paradise, right? So yeah.
I mean, the amount of people, poor children in the world who can get an education on the internet. I mean, you can just go on and people connecting with each other. So anyway. And then, of course, there's so much bad that has come out of the internet as well, right? Just so much scams and abuse and addiction and teen anxiety and all of that. So I think with politics, I think it is a double-edged sword. And so I think it's easy to see the negatives that have come from the internet with politics. So you have, I don't know, like I feel like institutions like the New York Times used to be more professional when it was just and I think just being on the internet has put it in, it is an environment that encourages more partisan news across the board, and less professional, because it becomes a better business model to be more partisan on the internet. Social media, obviously, can create a political mob. It can spread crazy misinformation. It can make it hard to know what's true. It can put people in tribal bubbles and encourage tribalism. The outrage is the thing that the algorithms pick up quickest on because it's the thing that you're most likely to share.
Right.
So, it's the most outraged posts are the ones that you see the most, and that makes you angry, right? So it's easy to see how this can work, and again, an actual, a kind of a social media mob can pressure real world institutions to change their policies, and it can be kind of like an old school mob with their pitchforks and their now on the other hand, if you zoom out a little bit. Some of the worst political things that have happened in history are, a government or a movement gets their hold on, their handle on kind of all the, the military might and creates a totalitarian, dictatorship.
Right, with a tight hold on communication and information. That's
that's critical because so the thing about a liberal democracy is. It's this thing we talked about earlier with, that abstract thinking and language allowed us to connect our brains together as if they're each a neuron in a larger brain. And that's this crazy thing that allows us, no one person knows how to build a skyscraper or even a pencil.
I've read that essay. It's good. Yeah.
It's the best. It's such a great essay.
Yeah.
But together, the superbrain can. The superbrain can do all this stuff. The superbrain knows how to go to the moon, right? And so the superbrain thinks via people talking, because that's how the neurons communicate with each other.
Yeah.
So if you're a government and you want to have totalitarian control, what you need is the biggest threat to you is the superbrain deciding you're bad, but let's rebel. Mm-hmm. And so what you need to do is shut down the ability of the superbrain to think via censoring what people can say. So censoring what people can say censors what the superbrain can think. And so you end up with no one knows the thought that this government is bad and illegitimate and should be overthrown, and we need to coordinate and do that, can never actually travel through the brain. It's stuck in everyone's quarantined in everyone's head, and no one knows if everyone else is thinking it or not, because everyone's too scared to say it. So everyone might assume that they're the only one. Everyone out on the outside is saying the right things because they're scared, and now everyone assumes that they must be the only one thinking it, and then they lose confidence in that thought. It works. I mean,
kind of a social prisoner's dilemma there. Yeah.
Look at North Korea, no one can communicate. So now everyone starts to assume that everyone else is thinking different things. It kind of causes a group madness, and that makes them very easy to control.
Right.
And the internet makes that very hard. If you're just like it can fire up the worst sides of us. If you're a totalitarian dictatorship, or your goal is to create one, or a movement that kills anyone who disagrees with them, good luck controlling that narrative. The internet is going to take you apart, and there's going to be all kinds of anonymous forums and things going viral about how wrong you are, and pointing out the problems and showing videos of the awful things you've done. There's some awful thing that happened. It's a video that goes everywhere and makes everyone angry. I would not want to try to control a populace that has the internet. So I think it's also a defense mechanism against the worst thing. So it's very interesting. I don't really know where it all shakes out.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. Again, from my perspective, thinking about this from the business end of the internet, as it were, right? It's that it is, I said before, anarchic, right? It literally is, right? There is no central authority over the internet, particularly because it instantaneously connects people across, hundreds of countries. Depends on how much access people within those countries have. But
I actually went to North Korea for 5 days in 2013. Wow. Yeah,
interesting.
It was quite interesting. They, I talked to the tour guide a lot, who's North Korean, and they're giving me their spiel about their worldview and how
right.
they have a whole different view of how things are. And one of the things they have is they have an intranet. They do not have any access to it. It would the whole it would be the whole house of cards would crumble if they had the internet for 1 second. Because part of the belief is that the South Koreans are all suffering under American occupation. The war is still going on from the 50s, and Americans have been, basically holding our poor cousins down there hostage, and they all wish they could be up here where our dear, our brave dear leaders have kept us. Americans are too scared to come up here. They can't. Our leader was so strong that, that's a crazy worldview. And if they could see for a second, oh wow, South Korea is thriving. They're the 15th biggest economy in the world. People get to travel the world. They have all this opportunity, and they're politically free. It would be done. So no internet there. But like you said, right now, once you have it, it's very hard. And what's interesting is, before you might say, okay, well, the country could, somehow cut off power supply, or whatever, just maybe somehow. Now you have people with solar energy connecting to satellites, right? Like, good luck. Like you cannot, now that you have this, Starlink and probably soon, other networks of internet in the sky that is not able, that no government has control over, and you can, even if they cut off all the electricity, right? Like you can have solar power connection to it. So it's kind of a cat out of the bag that cannot be put back in, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. It is still complicated though, right? Because then there are, within the sort of free and open internet, people who have sorted themselves into a stream of essentially almost North Korean like misinformation, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly not on the same degree or scale, but there is that sort of give and take of like okay, one of the big differences of the world that we used to live in, and again that our brains are ill equipped to handle, is that from wherever you want to put it, Gutenberg to, through television broadcast, there were some gatekeepers which at the time I really would have argued was bad mostly, right? You know what I mean? But now I've sort of had to rethink that a little bit. I'm like, okay, well maybe some amount of gatekeeping is useful when it comes to absolute misinformation, right? So
it's a really hard one, so like the government
yeah.
has to have some regulation, right? You can't be doing
Right.
illegal things.
Yeah.
Like the government should be cracking down on illegal things both on and off the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just such a slippery slope
It
once you
is.
start
Yeah.
to say the
It's quick.
government can send,
Yeah.
can censor misinformation, because even if just say you have the most honest administration that is putting that in for the best reasons, and they are truly just trying to, have scientists and experts, making the calls on what's in all first of all, scientists and experts can be wrong, and
Absolutely.
and so many things we now know are true. If you went back to a certain point, all the smart people thought were wrong. So that's already a game that is maybe
Mm-hmm.
inadvisable. But all it takes is now the next administration comes in, and it's a pretty tense political moment, and
Flips the gatekeeping on its head, right? Yeah.
they start just saying suddenly everything that the is inconvenient for the government becomes misinformation, because it's and you're just opening that door for the government to be able to censor what can be said, which is a violation of the First Amendment. So I think it's a really slippery slope. I don't really trust the last few administrations. We've seen some really clownish,
Yep.
kind of, just like I said, our other institutions, a lot of them have kind of fallen into decadence of one kind or another. I think you see it, I hope we can recover. I think we can bounce back from it, but I think we've seen a lot of like the kind of core principles being violated in government too. And I don't trust the politicians to not abuse that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially, it's all fine until there's that one really sensitive moment, a really hot, heated moment, within the 4 years, and then suddenly all this stuff is just disappearing from the internet, and
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know.
Well, and that's exactly my point. Is that truly the economic structure, the physical structure, everything about the internet makes that an incredibly difficult prospect at this time, right? So definitely, I always think of a quote here by Neil deGrasse Tyson of all people, right? So like a science communicator saying like, hey, without the ability to say something that goes against the status quo, you can't do science properly.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. All right. Well, so Tim, before we run out of time, I want to get to the book that you're currently working on, and as we will hear, it's way more than we could possibly hope to talk about here. But in particular, I want to talk about AI, because that's again where it sort of impacts my life and what I think about. But first, just tell us briefly about, and I say briefly there because when the folks hear what the book is about, we'll see how that become very unbrief very quickly. But what's your forthcoming book about?
So it's basically trying to tell the story of everything, from the starts at the Big Bang,
Yeah.
and we go to the end of the universe, and we try to like cover everything in between. And which is why I'm not just
a little
thinking
undertaking. Yeah.
it's interesting. I'm learning a ton about a ton of things.
Mm-hmm.
I knew about ARPANET because I was trying to tell that story about
Absolutely.
the beginning of the internet, and so it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, it's an albatross, and yeah, of course, when I get to the part about the future, which is like the last 30-40% of the book,
Right.
you got to talk a lot about AI.
Yeah.
And there's I kind of see two AI stories. The first is the story kind of happening right now. That there's kind of been a deep learning revolution in the last decade, and started with you started hearing about it with stuff like AlphaGo and DeepMind's ability to win these games that people thought a computer could never win.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, obviously, you have 2017. Google comes out with their transformer architecture, which is lays the groundwork for LLMs. And now we've got these ChatGPT, et cetera, these LLMs that are it reminds me of, you talked about the early days. I think about the early days of computers, and not the really early days, when there were industrial or commercial machines only, but even personal computers, the late
Mm-hmm.
80s,
Yeah.
1990, early 90s.
I had an Apple IIe with the green
I
screen.
had an Apple II GS. That was my childhood
Yeah.
computer. I loved it.
Yep.
Great computer. Zany
Yeah.
Golf.
Mhm.
But I think people at the time thought this is a really useful household device. It's like an even more useful typewriter. You can do word processing. You can process data. It's like, what a great, useful device.
Mhm.
And until the internet, people didn't understand that is not really what this thing is going to be. What this is going to be, it's going to be something. It's going to be those things, but it's a window into this other world that doesn't exist yet. And
Mhm.
so it's almost like this quaint little era of personal computers where they couldn't talk to each other yet.
Right.
And like, to bring back the other part, it's like humans before we had abstract language. It's like everyone's stuck in their head, and suddenly we have language, and this giant new big brain develops. Well, same thing with computers. They were stuck in their own, and then they could suddenly communicate. And I think about the early days of the internet, and then also there's this quaint era, internet, web 1.0, and then maybe from 1995 to 2000, something like that, when you've got, or 2002, something like that, pre-social media, pre-even interactive websites. They were just kind of static web pages where you could buy something or you could read something. You weren't posting your own thing on the internet. You weren't commenting. You weren't clicking like on someone's thing. You weren't adding your own thing to the internet.
Yeah.
It was just to view and to use. And at the time, people thought this is this new thing, right? And you can search, you can learn so much. It was amazing. But it's like, this isn't really the internet yet. This is a cute little, like, very, very embryonic version of what it's about to become, which is this interactive thing where we all kind of go into the internet now. We're all like in it together. And so when I look at LLMs today, I see that I think whatever we think this is now, I think that people in 10, 15, 20 years will say, that was this cute, quaint little age when people were using it to write their emails and to ask questions. And they were using it as their therapist. And it was this useful tool before it became the real thing, the thing that really changes the world. I don't think we've even gotten there yet. And I don't know what that thing is going to be. It's really hard to predict. But I think this is the baby version. This is the really early days of whatever is happening right now.
No, it's interesting being in the tech world, and I'm certainly not someone who's knowledgeable about how AI developed and whatnot. I'm thinking about the markets and whatnot, but still having to sort of be around those people and read what they write. There's such a spectrum of people who are saying, oh, well, we'll have AGI or even ASI, right, within X number of years. Some saying I've read some fairly convincing articles that by folks who really sounded like they knew they were talking about that we have, artificial general intelligence by the end of this year, right? And others who say, no, that's 10 years off. Then you get to this point where you realize that they can't even agree what AGI even means. Like, we really don't know what that means. And one way I think that this is so clear is I'm a long-term nerd, right? I've been reading about the Turing test since I was a kid. Now that we've got these LLMs that probably could certainly pass what we thought of as the Turing test, but we also know aren't really thinking, right? You know what I mean? So it's really hard to know where we are in that line and what it looks like at the end, which
it was comforting to
point, So,
I had the same exact experience where I thought I just didn't fully understand this stuff. I was like, why? I was like, I don't think I really get what AGI is. Like, I can say the words that define it. It's this, a full breadth of intelligence across the board, like human. But I was like, well, when do we get, what does that exactly mean? When do we get there? What is that actually, is that actually different than it just having a bunch of narrow skills together? Or is it something fundamentally different? And then I realized that no one knows. And then I felt better. I mean, it's like when you think you're a little confused, like no one really knows what's going on right now. And in fact, the experts will readily admit that we don't really, we don't even know what goes on inside of an LLM. We don't know some people think these things are already conscious. Some people think they're nowhere near conscious. They never could be. And like you said, there's just wild ranges of timelines. So again, we go from like ASI 14 months from now to 50 years from now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Or it'll never get to that level for some reason, There's
yeah,
also,
and there's that argument too that there's something, like we were saying before, that even when you call Homo sapiens sapiens, before that there's a million years of Homo species, and maybe there's no way we could replicate what happens in our neural net over a million years of evolutionary pressure. Who knows?
we just don't know. Like consciousness, for example, emerged from that. Like, can consciousness just exist in a silicon brain? Maybe.
Is consciousness
maybe it totally could.
Is it in everything? Right?
Exactly.
We don't need to get into panpsychism or anything like that. But suffice to say, it's an extremely unknowable, even among the people who are most versed in these topics, right?
And that goes from kind of a fun abstract debate to like pretty important now. Suddenly, it's like, well, 100%. This thing is conscious or not. Like it might say it's conscious either way. How do we know if it is? Can we recognize that in its? We don't know what goes on in that. The training happens where it's this trillions of nodes and knobs that are dialed in this crazy deep learning network of layers of neurons. Trillions of connections, and they all get wired, and their weights and biases get changed through training, not by humans. These knobs get tuned so the thing suddenly can think. It can do it. It can answer your question. It becomes amazing at what it does. And the people who made it don't know what's going on in there. They just designed the architecture, the actual. It's like they designed like a system of neurons in a brain, but then just the same way neuroscientists don't really know what goes on in our brain. They don't really know what we know very little about what the workings of the brain. So it's the same way. And so there's debates about timeline and about, but there's also, of course, a giant range of opinions about whether this is going to be good.
The death of humanity or utopia, right?
Exactly. Or everything in between. Some people think it's going to be just as little improvement. I mean, some people think that. Some people think it's going to be, so it's a crazy, very interesting, a little scary, a little very exciting time to be alive.
We could be looking at a kind of singularity that we really, can't see past, right?
Well, I'm not. I don't come in with my own opinion. I'm basically trying to. I talked to 50 plus people about this. I'm trying to synthesize. What are the camps? What are the camps? What do they say? Where are their disagreements? Let's steel man each of them, and then you can decide for yourself. Including a camp I call the event horizoners, where they see 10 years from now as basically an event horizon, which is like
the singularitarians,
where you cannot see past. Good, bad. There's no way to have anything to say about that because it's just
there again. As a big nerd, I read Ray Kurzweil's book 20 years ago or whenever it came out, and it seemed really abstract. Then it seems very, very much less so now, right? So
much less so.
Yeah. And again, that's where I think this ties back to what you were starting the conversation is in thinking about our brains, such as they are, truly became what they are when we could communicate, right? And then we built this infrastructure to allow us to communicate virtually instantaneously. And that's really where AI develops, right? So again, not being an expert on this topic, I'm happy for someone to school me on it, but it strikes me that it would be unlikely for AI to happen without networked computers. And it's changing our physical landscape, right? What AI demands is massive data centers that are connected to
the $1 trillion cluster people are talking about coming, exactly. It's a city with multiple power plants.
Right. And building, nuclear fusion power plants that are still theoretical, but just going ahead and building them because they think we're close enough that we're going to need it. And then, of course, there's where really my world intersects is that then all of this has to be physically connected with wires, right? So I'm getting to the point of we are essentially potentially building a giant synthetic brain across the entire Earth. That is a physical thing, right?
You guys are some of the only people that actually can really understand the nuts and bolts of how most people just don't. They just very abstract. The internet's just there.
It's a cloud.
Connected with wires somewhere. Yeah, it's in the cloud. It's truly for such an important thing. It is amazing how little people know about it. It's a good post topic. I'll come back to you at some point when I need to I want to explain this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the way that AI will come into our lives, will literally function, really is going to come down to pushing those nodes where when you do inference. A lot of inference models have very low latency needs, and so that will be uneven around the world, just like the development of the internet was, right? So again, we find ourselves in the 21st century. We thought, if you remember like Thomas Friedman's book from the start of this millennium, The World is Flat or whatever, it might get even like less flat as AI gets rolled out differently for different people around the world too, which I think is going to be fascinating to watch,
Yeah, it's not boring for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. All right. So, in the kind of near term, what do you see unfolding? I know that you're saying that, we might get to this like singularity, and you're just reporting what a bunch of different people's views are, but let me nail you down. Like how do you see the next few years unfolding?
A prediction from me is going to be basically, I can say, there's people who totally disagree with each other, who I think are all know way more about this than I do.
This is what's so difficult about it,
right? So I don't even, people are like, what's your P doom? I'm like, whoever I heard from last is what I think, because so I truly don't know the best thing I can say is what I said before, which is that it feels like we're in this embryonic stage, and that the things that these LLMs are really going to be, and the ways they're going to change the world haven't even started yet. I think that I think people are going to, I think these are going to become members of our society. And for example, I think they're going to be people's girlfriends and spouses and best friends, and, truly like doctors, therapists, like people that, and I think that they're going to, just that's such a crazy fundamental. And not only are these going to be this new alien species here interacting with us, but at some point they're going to genuinely be like significantly smarter than we are. And so like, that's just inconceivable to us. That's never happened. Nothing like that has remotely ever happened before.
Yeah.
So that is, predictions, like, I can imagine, I can do lots of imagining, but like, I would not put my money down on any of them, because I'm like, I literally have no idea. So it's all I can say is kind of like, we should all be getting, reminding ourselves to reason from first principles as much as we can, and to continue to reassess and not to get stuck in any kind of way of thinking, because everything's changing so quickly, and try to stay nimble with our thinking, and have vigorous discussions about what should there be regulations, what's right and wrong here, because we do need to make decisions. And, I don't trust just people in government to do so. I think we should all be having those discussions that can inform who we vote for, that can become a major topic. I think these should become major topics, and then we should start voting based on this, and actually, all weighing in on it, because it affects everyone. We're all going to either, go up or down with this ship. So,
we have to keep thinking constantly and having these kinds of conversations. So I'm really glad to bring you to my audience, that are the people who are sort of making the nuts and the bolts of this without necessarily having that vision of what does it mean, right? So I need to connect this new data center or whatever it is. How does that fit into the picture of like what's going to happen to humanity? I think everyone should be involved in that conversation, rather than just sort of saying like, leave it to the governments, or leave it to Silicon Valley or whatever.
No, everyone should weigh in on this one. This is, it's like a bunch of chimps deciding to build humans or not, or how we should build humans. All the chimps should weigh in on that one.
Awesome. Well, this has been really fun, Tim. I hope that
great talking to you.
When the book is out, we can talk about it, or maybe our robot overlords will let us still talk about things in a few years.
I hope so.
Yeah, excellent. If listeners want to keep up with you, they go to Wait But Why. Is there other better ways to follow you?
And subscribe to the email list, so you'll know when things come out, and whenever I do something new, that's where I tell people about it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks. Cheers.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.